The amulet that should never have been sold, and the voice that called home. Would you buy an antique object if you knew it carried a spirit that just wanted to return home? Andre didn't believe any of that. It was just a charm. Beautiful, rare, full of details, and perfect for your collection. But on the first night, something started crying inside the safe. And then he started talking. Always at the same time. Always with the same phrase. I want to go back, home. What seemed like just an old piece became a portal to something much deeper. And now, there is no way to return what should never have been taken. The auction hall was silent, with the calculated shadow and the subtle aroma of antique wood in the air. Red velvets, objects aged by time, and curious glances from the few present. Collectors, discreet heirs, scholars of the occult. In the most secluded corner of the room, Andre observed everything with the elegant boredom of someone who had seen too much. A successful businessman, owner of a gallery and an enviable collection of sacred art and rare items, he had never believed in anything beyond the visible. The spiritual world was, for him, a whim of the fragile, until something messed with his perception, even if he didn't admit it right away. The piece appeared almost timidly, a small oval amulet forged in aged gold, with inscriptions that appeared to have been made by ritualistic hands rather than ordinary artisans. The auctioneer hesitated before describing it. He said it had belonged to a spiritualist lineage from the interior of Minas Gerais, but didn't offer many details. He commented somewhat awkwardly that the object had been donated after the death of the family's last heir, and that there had been resistance to putting it up for sale. The item, he said, carried too much emotional weight for those who knew it. Andre smiled discreetly. He'd heard stories like that before, exaggerations to inflate prices. But there was something about that amulet, not mystical, not magical, something purely aesthetic that touched him. An archaic beauty with an energy that, though he denied it, seemed to pulsate. He offered the bid. No one called it. As he took the object in his hands, he felt a slight tingling in his fingers. He looked down and noticed that the temperature of the metal seemed different, neither cold nor hot, as if it had its own pulse. But he quickly dismissed the thought with an internal chuckle. He placed the amulet in a velvet box and left, certain he had made a good deal. As he left the room, however, a woman with grey hair and very dark eyes intercepted him in the hallway. She didn't give her name or explain her presence. She simply extended her hand, discreetly pointed to the box he held and whispered, "This wasn't supposed to be sold." Andre responded with a wry smile and moved on, thinking she was just another eccentric among the many who frequented those esoteric environments. But the discomfort remained. In the car, when he opened the box to look at the amulet again, he noticed something he hadn't noticed before. Within the golden inscriptions was an imperceptible micro-engraving, only visible when reflected against the light. A phrase in rudimentary Latin, "Go back home, the soul is held." He translated it mentally with effort, something like, "Go home, the soul is trapped." He laughed, but it was a dry, short laugh, and it didn't echo in his chest as usual. When he got home, he put the amulet in the safe, more for material security than any supernatural fear. Before going to sleep, he looked in the bathroom mirror and saw himself strange, not older, not more tired, just as if someone were watching him from within. That night, before the clock struck 3 in the morning, Andre would wake up to a sound coming from the safe. But it wasn't the sound of metal, it was the sound of something crying. The digital clock on his bedside table read exactly 3:03 a.m. when Andre suddenly awoke, his throat dry and his heart racing. There was no alarm, no lights on, no breeze coming through any cracks, but something was pulling him to vigil. The sensation was uneasy, as if he were being watched from within, as if his soul had been poked in his sleep. He sat up in bed, still half asleep, trying to rationalize. Maybe it was the wine from dinner. Maybe it was the stress, or the fact that he'd participated in a strange auction and taken home an amulet that, no matter how Much he denied it, stirred something words couldn't explain. He got up to get some water, but as he passed through the dark hallway, a cold draft hit him in the chest. There were no open windows, and it wasn't winter. Then he listened, faint, muffled, coming from the office, trembling like a sob, like a suppressed cry, as if someone were hiding in a corner, trying not to attract attention, but unable to contain the pain. Andre froze. He stood in the middle of the hallway, his bare feet touching the cold floor. He tried to take a deep breath. He tried to laugh at himself. He tried to mentally repeat what he always told his friends. Fear is an emotional construct created by ignorance. But as he approached the office door, something else happened. The crying stopped. And then came a new sound, 3 muffled knocks coming from inside the vault. Not from the outside, not from the metal structure, but from within, as if someone or something was trapped there, trying to let people know it existed, that it hadn't been forgotten, that it was back. Andre flicked on the light. The room remained static, with no sign of intrusion, no visible anomaly. But there was one thing strange. The safe's door was slightly ajar. He was certain he'd locked it with a combination lock. He always did this as a precaution. Always. He opened the safe slowly, breathless. The amulet was there, on top of the velvet box, but not exactly as he'd left it. Now, there was a stain beneath it, dark, almost invisible. When he touched it with his finger, he realized it was damp, cold. Water, no thicker, almost as if the amulet cried. He slammed the safe shut. He went to the kitchen, drank the water in one gulp, and tried to forget. He tried to rationalize. He tried to sleep. But the sound of that voice, choked with sobs, haunted his thoughts for hours. Even with his eyes closed, even with his ears plugged, even with his soul in denial, and on the edge of sleep, between the real and the symbolic, Andre saw an image that he didn't know if it was a dream or a warning. A dirt road in the countryside, an old house in flames, and a figure kneeling amid the ashes, holding the same amulet, only broken in half. And the figure was crying. But the sound didn't come from the mouth. It came from the chest, as if it were crying with its spirit, not its eyes. He woke up with a start. The clock ticked 4:44, and for the first time in his life, Andre was afraid of what he had brought home. In the following days, Andre's life continued with a semblance of normality. He followed his morning routine, answered client calls, held virtual meetings, and responded to emails, but something about him had changed. It was subtle, almost imperceptible. A more weary look in his eyes, a shorter response, a more restless presence. The amulet remained locked in the safe. Andre didn't dare touch it anymore, even though something about it called to him. Not with words, not with gestures, but with a kind of constant pressure, a feeling that it wasn't where it should be, like a magnet that pushes instead of attracts. Then came the whispers. They began quietly, amidst the normal noises of the house. When the air conditioning went off, when the refrigerator made clicking noises, when the early morning silence settled in like a fog. At first, it was just formless sounds, muffled whispers, like someone trying to speak through a thick wall. Andre thought it was radio interference, loose wiring perhaps. The beginnings of auditory paranoia caused by stress, but all that fell apart on the third night when he clearly heard the first sentence, "I want to go back." The voice was thin, almost childlike, but at the same time filled with an ancient pain. It wasn't just a phrase, it was a plea, a contained desperation. He froze in the living room chair. The TV was off. The phone was silent. No sound in the room, only that whisper, and it was coming from inside the house. Home. Andre stood up as if pushed. He paced each room with bated breath, turning on lights, checking windows, suspicious even of his own footsteps. But he was alone, or at least that's what he could see. The next night, the pattern repeated itself. And once again, The voice made itself heard. Sometimes it seemed to come from the safe. Other times it seemed to echo inside the hallway mirror, but it always said the same thing. I want to go back, home. As if it weren't a sentence, but a reminder, a demand, an echo of something forgotten. Little by little, Andre began to lose control of time. He woke up with red marks on his arms, hair out of place. He dreamed of places he'd never visited, wooden houses in the middle of the woods, children playing around campfires, and chants in an ancient language, a mix of Latin and country dialect. In one of these dreams, he saw himself as a child, holding the same amulet, as if it had always been his. And someone, an old woman with sunken eyes and wrinkled hands, said firmly, "You're the last one, never take it away from here." He woke in a panic, sweaty, but with an uncomfortable certainty pulsing in his chest. That voice in the dream was the same one now whispering in his house. That night, for the first time, Andre didn't sleep. He sat down in front of the open safe. He stood there waiting, watching the amulet in silence, almost defying it, almost wanting to hear it again. And then he heard, not from the house, not from the safe, but from within it. A calm voice, trembling, familiar. Andre, he's bringing me back. He didn't know what hurt more, the fact that the voice knew his name, or the fact that part of him was already considering obeying. Waking up was no longer a restart. It was a continuation of something that had already begun on another plane. Andre began to avoid the mirror in the morning. He was afraid of seeing more than his reflection. Something in his appearance was different, not visibly, but energetically, as if he were inhabited by an echo that didn't belong to him, as if he carried in his body memories he never experienced. He then decided to do what he had always done when he felt threatened: investigate. He opened his collection of old catalogs, combed through auction documents, and analyzed the amulet's origin certificate. Everything was superficial. It said only that the piece came from a traditional family from the interior of Minas Gerais, part of an estate closed after the death of the last heir. No name, no clear reference, just a peculiar observation left by the donor. Do not sell if possible. Object of non-transferable spiritual value. He called the auctioneer, who responded evasively. He said the object was causing discomfort even among the employees, that many didn't want to touch it, and that they had merely acted as intermediaries. It was at this point that Andre decided to look for something outside his comfort zone: spiritualist communities. One sleepless night, he accessed hidden forums, old social media profiles linked to spiritualism and candomblé, and typed what he saw engraved on the amulet: Redi domum, anima tenetur. An answer caught his attention. An anonymous user with the profile name Guardian27 wrote something that chilled your spine. This amulet was part of an ancient spiritual seal used in houses of protection. It was like an energetic anchor. When removed from the place where it was consecrated, it breaks the bond of protection. The bound soul begins to wander until it is returned. Andre responded urgently, asking for more details. The profile disappeared. He never responded again, but the information remained etched in his mind like a knife. The next night, he had another dream. This time, it wasn't a child, but a man, very much like himself, with the same physique, but from another era. Simple clothes, bare feet, unshaven. He wore the amulet tied around his neck with a leather cord and walked slowly across an open field toward a white wooden house with blue casement windows. Upon entering the house, he was greeted by an elderly woman who smiled, touched the amulet on his chest and said, "As long as he's here, you'll be at peace, but never take him away. He guards more than the house. He guards you." Andre woke with tears in his eyes. It wasn't a normal cry. It was as if he was mourning someone he'd lost, but never met. Determined, he returned to his research. With effort, he managed to find a notarial document linked to the estate. A name appeared as the last record of the property where the amulet had been stored: Mrs. Amelia Rodriguez Ferraz. Age at death, 89 years. Cause of death, undetermined. Residence, rural area of Passatempo, Minas Gerais. While searching for images of the place, he found an old photograph digitized by a regional historian. It showed the house he'd dreamed of. It looked exactly the same. But what surprised him most was the presence, in the corner of the image, of a young man standing next to Amelia with features very similar to his own. The caption read, "Amelia and her adopted grandson, Benedito, 1932. Andre felt his blood run cold. He'd never met anyone named Benedito, but he felt in that moment as if he knew the pain of that name. And he had the strange, uneasy feeling that the amulet wasn't with him by chance. I was returning. The word withdrawal has never carried so much weight. Ever since he took the amulet from the auction and brought it home, Andre had been living with the nagging feeling that something was out of balance. But now, as the fragments of history began to come together, this feeling was no longer an intuition. It had a name: desecration. Following the clues from the 1932 photo and the name Benedito, Andre searched for historical records about the Passatempo region of Minas Gerais. What he found was a tangle of legends, erased archives, and a curious account published in a local folklore newsletter over 40 years ago, titled "The House of Silent Spirits." The text described a small rural property protected by a golden artifact that, according to the elders, had been consecrated by rituals passed down from generation to generation. There lived a family dedicated to discreet spiritual practices aimed at the energetic protection of the place, as if they were always defending the land from something prowling. The presence of the amulet was considered the seal of this protection, a link between the material and spiritual worlds. Legend had it that if the object were removed, there would be no revenge. There would be no screams, but there would be suffering. A subtle, invisible suffering, almost impossible to identify because it affected not the body, but the soul. The spirit of whoever was bound to the protection would be in suspense, trapped between worlds. A cycle of pain would begin and would only cease with the return of the object to its place of origin or to the lineage that consecrated it. Andre tried to go further. He searched for descendants of Amelia Rodriguez Ferraz. He tried to find her grandson, Benedito, or any name linked to the spiritual heritage. But all his searches led to dead ends. The family had dissolved after Amelia's death. Benedito had disappeared years before, and there were no records of any children or siblings. That's when a detail slipped his mind. The hallway mirror, where he'd previously avoided looking, began to show something strange in the wee hours. His own face, aged, not a reflection altered by fatigue or dim light. It was him, but with deep wrinkles, gray hair, and moist eyes, as if he'd lived decades past. Decades that weren't in his memory, but perhaps were in his very essence. On his fifth consecutive sleepless night, Andre found himself standing before the safe again. He opened it with trembling hands and examined the amulet closely. This time, he felt a sharp pain in his chest, as if the air were being forced out of his body. He couldn't look away. He was overcome by a sense of grief he couldn't explain. And then he heard once again the familiar voice, but now she said something different. "You're not the first, but you might be the last." It was like a warning, like a pact being reactivated. A cycle that hadn't ended, just gone dormant. The next morning, Andre received an anonymous envelope in his mailbox. No return address, no stamp, just his name handwritten in ancient script. Inside was an old newspaper clipping. It contained a news story about Amelia's death. The headline read, "Last Guardian dies at 89. Spiritual lineage of Serra ends after more than a century of silent rituals." And at the bottom of the article, in small, almost faded letters, there was a final sentence written in pen. "Now that you've taken it, you must give it back, even if there's no one left." As he read the sentence at the bottom of the newspaper clipping, Andre felt the weight of a destiny beginning to close in on him. As if the decision he'd made weeks ago to acquire that amulet had actually been a programmed return, a karmic mechanism activated at just the right moment. It was no longer just about the object, it was about him. Driven by an inexplicable urgency, he decided to do what he had avoided since the beginning, travel to Passatempo, Minas Gerais. On the road, the radio was failing, cell phone signal wavered. The cloudy sky seemed to weigh down the asphalt. No matter how hard he tried to rationalize, Andre couldn't shake the feeling that he was being guided, not by his own will, but by something older, quieter, and waiting for him. Upon arriving in town, he sought information about the former Faraz family estate. The locals were hesitant to speak. They looked at him suspiciously, as if sensing something he himself couldn't name. A man at the local store, upon hearing the name Amelia Faraz, merely murmured, "Her house is no longer there. It burned down, alone, without anyone." Andre felt the ground slip away for a moment. He followed the directions and arrived at a remote rural area where the brush had begun to overtake the dirt road. At the end of the path, among twisted trees, he found what remained of the house: ashes, charred pieces of wood, and an oppressive silence that seemed to prevent even the birds from singing. The structure had been completely consumed by fire. There were no traces of electrical wiring, no plausible explanation. Local authorities had filed the case as accidental combustion of undetermined origin. But something there screamed otherwise. Andre walked cautiously through the rubble. Each step made the charred wood beneath his feet creak. The smell was still there, a sweet, metallic aroma, like that of burning incense mixed with dried blood. And then he saw, in the center of what had been the former main room, a partially charred wooden cross lay on the black floor. As he approached, he noticed that despite the flames, it still retained a small symbol engraved on its base, the same design as the amulet. As he touched the cross, a wave of warmth ran up Andre's arm. But it wasn't physical. It was a memory of him, but not his. He saw himself, for a brief second, lighting candles inside that house. He saw himself kneeling with his eyes closed, the amulet clasped to his chest, chanting words his current mind didn't recognize, but which his soul seemed to remember. And he heard a voice, the same voice. This was home. This was the seal. This was the end and the beginning. Andre fell to his knees, overcome with tears he couldn't contain. It wasn't ordinary sadness. It was mourning for something lost before he was even born. It was as if his soul was crying for having returned too late. He looked around. Everything was dead, and the presence he felt was no longer there. As if, when it was torn from there, the amulet had taken with it the soul that guarded that place. He had broken something, and now the echo of what he destroyed was stuck with him. On the way back to the car, Andre felt something pulsing in his chest. Opening his shirt, he noticed a faint, red, circular mark. It was as if the amulet, even inside his backpack, was leaving an impression on him, as if searching for a new anchor. On the way back, the radio started working again, but it only played static. In the background of the static, a voice. Weak. "Didn't you hear? Take me back." The days that followed Andre's return were anything but ordinary. His house, once silent and predictable, began to breathe, as if every wall were watching, every piece of furniture shrinking, and every shadow growing longer than it should. He no longer slept. He simply closed his eyes and waited for the night to pass quickly, but the night did not pass. She stayed, and it started to move. The first day after visiting the ashes of the house, the sound returned. No longer a timid whisper. Now it was a presence, a constant murmur, like a tearful mumbling, filling the corners of the house. When he turned on the lights, it stopped. When he turned them off, it returned. When he tried to ignore it, it intensified. And then came the movements. In the office where the amulet was kept, Pictures began to fall from the wall, always around 3 in the morning, always the pictures with religious images. The wooden cross inherited from his grandmother split in half. The bathroom mirror began to fog up, even when the water was cold. And on the glass, a word appeared, to go back. One morning, Andre woke up with a sharp pain in his chest. He felt as if he were being pulled from the inside out. He ran to the mirror, trying to calm himself, but froze when he saw his reflection. It was him, but not exactly him. His face looked older, his eyes deeper, and there was an expression of pleading he didn't recognize in himself. A silent plea, a charge. The next morning, he found one of the chairs overturned on the living room floor, and next to it, the amulet out of the safe. He didn't remember opening it. The password was intact, but the object now sat in the center of the house, as if it had placed itself there of its own volition. That night, he locked everything. He locked the safe with a different code. He locked the doors, the windows, even himself in the room. But still, in the middle of the night, he was awakened by 3 knocks on the bedroom door. There was no one in the hallway. From then on, everything accelerated. The books on the shelf began to fall, one by one. The lights flickered, and in the kitchen, a glass shattered before her eyes. The amulet now changed location every day, appearing on the bed, in the closet, on the coffee table. It was as if to say, "You took me, now take me back." But where to? The house was destroyed. The lineage was dead. The seal was broken. Andre sought the help of a local priest, attempting to bless the object. The priest, upon looking at the amulet, paled. He said it was beyond his sphere, that there were energies there that not even the Vatican would dare confront. He suggested, with a trembling voice, that he seek a spiritual home, a terreiro, a place where the ancestors still spoke, where the spirit would not be treated as a metaphor. Andre hesitated, but there was no denying it anymore. He wasn't just being chased, he was being charged. That same night, he dreamed again, but now he wasn't just a spectator. He was the man from the old house. He was on his knees, holding the amulet. In front of him was the same elderly woman from the other dreams, Amelia. She touched his forehead and said, "You promised you would never leave here." And behind her, the figure of a child wept, its face covered in soot. It repeated the phrase Andre already knew by heart, but which now sounded like a final lament. "Take me back." Waking from that dream, Andre didn't just feel fear, he felt guilt. Not a rational guilt, but an ancestral one, as if he had broken a vow his soul had made. Before he was even born, the image of that child covered in soot, Amelia's gaze, the echoing phrase, all of it no longer seemed like a dream. It was a memory that refused to die. That morning he didn't look in the mirror. It was decided. He discreetly researched spiritual centers, Umbanda houses, candomblé, Kardashian traditions, and small ancient terreiros that still preserved rituals linked to the land and ancestry. He avoided big names, seeking places where faith was still passed on with breath and hand, not with advertising and doctrine. It was in a forgotten neighborhood of the city that he found what seemed like a refuge between worlds, a humble house, without a sign, with a rusty iron gate, surrounded by rue, guinea grass, and rosemary. When he rang the doorbell, an elderly woman wearing a white turban and with eyes as intense as burnt coal opened the door. She didn't ask his name. She simply looked at him as if recognizing someone from another life. "You brought him, didn't you?" he said, before Andre could even speak. Andre hesitated. He opened his backpack and took out the amulet, wrapped in a dark cloth. The woman took a half step back. Her eyes shone for a second, as if she was seeing an incarnate spirit. That object wasn't supposed to be loose. It was the seal. It was the lock, she murmured, more to herself than to him. The atmosphere inside the house was charged with energy, but not fear. It was like being in a place where life and death conversed without conflict. She led him to an altar with candles, herbs, ancient images and inscriptions that Andre couldn't understand. "You're not the first to come here looking for answers," said the saintess, "but you're the first to bear the mark." Andre frowned. She pointed to his chest. The mark, the same red circle that had appeared after the visit to the ruins. It was stronger now, more pronounced, as if the amulet had stamped it with the role of guardian. The energy you carried out wants to come back, not to destroy, not to haunt. It wants rest. Andre asked if it was possible to return it. The woman shook her head. The house was burned. The land was violated. The lineage ended. There is no where to return. There is only how, and that how requires courage. She then explained a ritual of symbolic return, a way to resignify the bond, to return not the object, but its energy to the earth that originated it. It would require a neutral location, close to nature, free from spiritual pollution, fire, earth, water, and words. A ritual of surrender, not exorcism, but there was a warning. The spirit that is trapped in the amulet doesn't want to go alone. Andre felt a chill. What does that mean? That when he leaves, he might take what you've bonded with him with, she replied regretfully. Maybe a fragment of you, maybe something you'll never get back. That's the price of breaking up. Andre closed his eyes. He thought of the whispers, the voices, the visions, the mark on the mirror, the child, Amelia. He thought of everything he carried and everything he wanted to free. "I accept," the woman nodded. "Prepare yourself, because this return will also be a crossing." On the night scheduled for the ritual, the sky seemed heavier than usual. It wasn't raining, but thick clouds obscured the stars. The wind blew with a steady rhythm, like an ancient breath, preparing the invisible world for what was about to happen. Andre arrived at the indicated location, an open space on the edge of town, where tall trees bent like silent sentinels and the sound of crickets mingled with the murmur of a nearby stream. The mother of the saint was already waiting for him, accompanied by 2 younger women and a silent man carrying a small drum. No one spoke, they only waved. The air was dense, as if time had stopped. In the center of the circle, drawn with leaves and coarse salt, a clay bowl was placed. Inside were a handful of dark earth, spring water, and a white candle, all symbolizing the 4 elements of nature. Andre was instructed to remove the amulet from the cloth and place it on the earth with his own hands. The touch was different that time. The object was burning, not physically, but as if absorbing his energy back. Andre felt a tremor run up his back. The drum beats began, cadenced, steady, ancestral. The mother of the saint chanted softly, almost like a lament, and with each verse, something around him seemed to respond. The wind grew stronger. The leaves danced in spirals, the candles flickered. Andre, on his knees, kept his eyes closed. So, listen, not one voice, but many, fragmented, overlapping. Some wept, others whispered, but they all said the same thing. Now, now, now. The drum stopped. The mother of the saint approached and placed her hand on Andre's forehead. He felt a force tearing at his consciousness, as if a veil had been ripped away. Images began to emerge, memories that weren't his own, past lives, rituals by lamplight, women praying around a bonfire, a birth marked by promise, and then a rupture, a spiritual betrayal, and then he saw. He was Benedict in another life, in another time, and he had fled that house with the amulet on his chest after Amelia's death, driven by fear, by ego, by the feeling that he needed to be free. But in doing so, he sealed everyone's fate. The house was unprotected, the seal was broken, and the child, the one who held the link, was trapped between worlds, unable to reincarnate, unable to rest, unable to leave. Andre screamed, but no one heard. It was an internal scream, spiritual, and at the height of the ritual, the candles went out on their own. The drum fell to the ground. The wind ceased. Silence. For a moment, everything seemed resolved, but then something rose from the center of the circle, a dense shadow shaped like a human, but faceless, a presence that wasn't one of anger, but of pain. It looked at Andre, or at least it seemed to, and slowly advanced toward him. The saintess tried to restrain her, but the shadow ignored her. She stopped before André and extended her arm. In her incorporeal hand, the amulet floated, now shining bright gold, as if purified. André hesitated. The shadow leaned over. It placed the object against his chest and disappeared. He fainted. When he woke, it was already daylight. He was alone. The amulet had disappeared. In its place, on the still damp earth, was only a design etched in embers. The amulet's symbol, now burned, into the ground. As he looked up at the sky, a cloud moved away, revealing the sun. But inside André, something still remained. The sun that rose that morning seemed calmer, as if nature silently acknowledging that something ancient had finally found rest. André remained for long minutes, kneeling before the embers on the ground, the symbol of the amulet now sealed in the earth, as if it had absorbed what remained of what the man carried. There was no more pain in his chest. There were no more whispers. There was no longer the constant, invisible presence that had once watched over him from the shadows of the mirrors. But also, there was no longer the same André. When he arrived home, something made him hesitate before opening the door. For a moment, he felt like he no longer belonged there, that the energy that had welcomed him until then no longer recognized him as it once had. And in his suit, as he crossed the threshold, he noticed that the air was different. There were no more nighttime noises, no invisible movements. The house was peaceful, but not him. In the hallway mirror, her reflection returned to normal. It was her face, no distortions, no strange looks. But there was a new mark, a discreet, circular spot on the left side of her chest. Touching it, she realized it wasn't superficial. The skin felt warmer, as if something still lived there, not as a burden, but as a seal. That mark never went away. André tried to move on with his life. He resumed his business, avoided talking about what had happened, and remained silent in front of his friends, and even in front of himself. But over time, he began to notice something strange. Whenever he came into contact with ancient objects, especially those of spiritual origin, from inheritances, auctions, or collections, something in him would be activated. I felt a tingling sensation in my hands, a pressure in my chest, very subtle voices, as if I could hear the spirit of the object. At first, he thought it was paranoia, trauma perhaps. But then, unusual situations began to arise. He received spiritual objects by mistake. People came to him seeking guidance, as if they knew instinctively that he harbored some kind of sensitivity. One collector even asked him to appraise an ancient African relic, and when André touched the object, he saw scenes he couldn't explain. A ritual, a chant, a voice of lamentation. He didn't ask for this, but I couldn't deny it anymore. The amulet had disappeared, but it had left an impression, not just on his skin, but on his soul, as if it had passed on to him not just its pain, but its function. He was no longer the man who had bought it for aesthetic reasons. Now, he was a guardian, not of a specific object, but of a silent balance between the visible and the invisible, between what needs to be returned and what needs to be respected. Sometimes in the middle of the night, he still wakes up with a strange feeling, but not out of fear, of calling, an energy that vibrates in the chest, like a spiritual compass pointing to something that has been violated, forgotten, or taken out of place. And in those moments, he understands. What happened to the amulet wasn't a mistake. It was a return. It was a cycle closing so that another could begin. And he now silently carries the responsibility of listening when no one else is listening. And when the wind blows too hard in the middle of the night, he hears, in the background, there are still others who want to go home.